I was preparing lunch when I overheard Hope on the phone with someone. My daughter was criticizing me as if I weren't even there. I know she's my mother, but I can't take it anymore. Your mom, Doris, at least helps out with money, I heard her say while I stirred the beans in the kitchen. When I turned off the stove, Hope entered the kitchen with a very cold and unfriendly look in her eyes, something I had never seen before. Mom, we've already talked and reached a decision. You'll need to move out of here this week, she said. Doris is coming back to stay in her room because she actually helps with the household expenses. You just spend money and contribute nothing. Her words struck me like a bolt of lightning from the sky. 30 years living in this house, raising my children, taking care of everything. Now I was just a heavy burden. My heart felt like it was breaking into tiny pieces, but I said nothing. Hope's voice grew colder and more distant as she continued speaking. Mom, did you hear what I said? You have 1 week to pack your things. Doris is coming back this weekend and will need her room all to herself. I turned slowly, still holding the wooden spoon I had been stirring with. Hope, dear, this is my house, I said gently. Where do you want me to go? She asked impatiently, as if it was a silly question. That's your problem. Find a boarding house or stay with a relative, I don't know. I just know you can't stay here and be a burden to us anymore. David appeared at the kitchen door, nodding in support of his wife. It's for the best, Grace. The house is small, and my mother truly needs to come back here. I went upstairs with trembling legs and a heavy heart. I sat on the bed where I had shared my life with my late husband Michael for 25 years. The walls displayed photos of my children from when they were young and of birthday parties I had lovingly organized for them. Hope got married right here in this house. How could she throw me out like that? As if I were an old piece of furniture crowding the living room. I grabbed a small suitcase and began packing a few clothes. My hands trembled so much I could hardly fold the blouses properly. 1 week to leave my own home. I had nowhere to go. I didn't have much money saved, and at 68 years old I wondered who would welcome me with open arms. But what they didn't realize was that I still kept some very important secrets that Michael had left me before he died. During those difficult first days, I stayed in a cheap boarding house downtown while I searched for a permanent place to stay. The room smelled of damp mold, and the mattress sagged badly in the middle, but it was the only affordable option I had with the little money I had saved. I used to stay awake very late, thinking back to when Hope was young and had terrible nightmares. I would spend the entire night sitting by her bed, softly singing until she was finally asleep, feeling safe and at peace. Where had that little girl gone, the one who called me her little queen and promised that when she grew up she would take care of me forever? What had become of the love I believed deeply in between us? During that difficult and desperate week, I tried calling Hope many times in a row. When she answered, she was distant and impatient. Mom, I've already told you there's no going back. You need to accept the new situation and stop bothering me. I then called my eldest son, Charles, who lives far away in another city. He listened quietly and then let out a heavy sigh. Mom, I want to help. But Patricia doesn't want visitors staying long at the house. You know how she is about those things. Even my own family had abandoned me when I needed help the most. I walked through the streets of the city where I was born, where I got married, and where I raised my children. Yet, I felt like a complete stranger, utterly lost. It was on a Friday when I met my neighbor at the bakery that I uncovered something that changed everything forever. Grace, what a surprise to see you here. How are things going at home? I hesitated greatly before replying. Oh, Anthony, I've been staying away from the house these days. He looked confused and puzzled. That's strange because your daughter Hope told me yesterday that you had gone to visit relatives, and they plan to do some remodeling on the house. I even saw her making arrangements with some contractors. In that moment, my blood ran cold. Hope was spreading falsehoods to all the neighbors, inventing stories about renovations and relatives, when in truth she simply wanted to hide me from the community that had known me all my life. If she was so shamelessly lying about this, what other plans was she secretly making behind my back? In that very moment, something inside me finally shattered for good. It was not pain or anger. It was a cold, clear understanding of the full truth. That night, in my small room at the boarding house, I took out a tiny box I always kept with me. Inside were some very important papers Michael had given me many years before. Grace, if you ever need complete independence, use this, he had said with so much love. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Now I saw clearly how much care my husband had always taken with me. Michael was always a man who planned carefully and continued to protect me even after he passed away. He had hidden things I was completely unaware of, documents that could change everything if I used them wisely. The next morning, very early, I woke up, took my time with a warm bath, dressed in my finest outfit, and left the boarding house with only a small bag. I had urgent matters to attend to before the week ended. First, I went to the bank where Michael held a special account I barely knew about. The manager greeted me with great courtesy. After checking my documents and a special key that Michael had left for me, she took me into a private office reserved for important clients. What I saw on the computer screen stunned me speechless and took my breath away. Michael had been saving money in that account for more than 20 years, all without my knowing a thing about it. There was more than $200,000 saved, in addition to some investments that had grown significantly over the years. Grace, your husband, left very clear instructions when he opened this account. This money was meant for you to use only if you needed protection or complete independence from the family, the manager explained to me kindly. I smiled for the first time in weeks. My Michael was always a man who thought ahead and continued to look out for me even after he was gone. I left the bank and headed straight to the county recorder's office. I had some very important documents to verify without delay. For the following 2 weeks, I moved forward silently and with great caution. I hired a discreet and experienced lawyer, organized all the critical papers for the house, and planned each step with the precision of an expert surgeon. Hope called me from time to time, always with that cold, distant tone that hurt so deeply. "You're now accustomed to the boarding house, right, Mom? It's a better arrangement. Everything here at the house is coming together nicely." I agreed quickly and hung up the phone. There was nothing else I needed to discuss. On the day we had scheduled, I woke early, took a long bath, dressed in my best clothes, and left the boarding house carrying only a small suitcase. The moment had arrived to make the final, irreversible decision. When they came back from their outing that afternoon, they would realize that some choices in life have no turning back. David and Doris returned from the mall, loaded with shopping bags and laughing loudly. They had made good use of the money they were now saving by not needing to worry about me anymore. Doris looked radiant, dressed up nicely, finally settled into the room she had wanted for so long. But as they reached the street in front of the house, they saw something that left them completely stunned. There was a large "Sold" sign nailed to the front gate and a moving truck parked right by the curb. Hope dropped all her bags on the ground and hurriedly ran to the door, trying to open it with her key. However, the lock had been completely changed. "What the hell is going on here?" she shouted hysterically at the man carrying furniture out. "The owner, Grace, sold the house, ma'am?" Today was the last day to retrieve her personal belongings. I arrived at the door precisely at that moment, personally overseeing the removal of my things. Hope saw me and darted toward me like a frantic person. "Mom, what did you do? Have you completely lost your mind?" I looked at her with total calmness. "I did exactly what you asked for, Hope. I've removed myself from your life forever." I showed her all the documents proving the house had always been mine, registered solely in my name since we purchased it. Your father was very clever. He understood that someday I might need protection from my own family. David tried to argue, completely desperate. "But Grace, where will we live? Our whole life is here." I smiled with a distance that even I did not recognize in myself. "That was a question you should have asked yourselves before throwing me out onto the street, like an abandoned dog." David tried to argue, his voice shaking with total despair. "But Grace, where are the three of us supposed to go now? Everything we had in life is here. My mother left everything behind to come live with us." I smiled with a coldness I no longer recognized in myself. "That's a question you should have thought about before forcing me out onto the street like an abandoned dog. Let Doris figure it out on her own, just as you told me to figure things out on my own." I got into the car I had called, carrying only a small suitcase and my usual purse. Hope chased the car in a desperate rush, shouting, pleading, and crying loudly, but I never looked back once. The neighbors had come outside to watch the scene and were whispering among themselves, clearly impressed. Anthony waved at me from his window, a broad smile of approval on his face. I had bought a small yet very comfortable apartment in a different city, fully furnished and ready for me to settle into peacefully. All the money from selling the house was safely kept and wisely invested in the bank, along with the inheritance my Michael had left me with so much love. For the first time in many, many months, I felt completely free, taking deep breaths and looking ahead at the road before me. They wanted me to disappear from their lives forever, and so that is exactly what I did. In these first days of my new life, I uncovered a part of myself I hadn't known for many years. I no longer need to walk on eggshells in my own home. I no longer have to listen to complaints about my presence. I am no longer a burden to anyone. My apartment is small, but it belongs entirely to me. Every piece of furniture, every plate, every choice is mine alone. When I want to watch television, I watch whatever I feel like. When I feel like cooking, I prepare exactly what I want to eat. In the afternoons, I go for walks in the nearby park and chat with women who, like me, have realized that family isn't always what you expected. Last night, the phone kept ringing repeatedly. It was Hope, but I have nothing left to say to her. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I poured myself a soothing chamomile tea. Tomorrow, I plan to start painting classes at the community center nearby. The woman who helped me register said, "Many women my age are discovering new talents after 60. I'm very eager to learn something entirely new, something just for myself, without worrying about what others might think or say." Tonight, before I drifted to sleep, I looked out the window at the stars shining over my new city. Michael, if you are watching from heaven, thank you for looking after me even after you left. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose our own dignity. Hope believed she was punishing me by kicking me out of the house. What she didn't realize was that she was actually giving me the freedom I hadn't dared to claim for myself. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come in the form of painful betrayals. 3 weeks have passed since I moved into my new apartment, and each morning I wake up without the knot in my stomach that had been with me for years. But the nights feel different. In the quiet of my new home, memories come rushing like waves I can't seem to stop. Last night, while sorting through my few possessions, I discovered a box of photographs I managed to take out of the house before selling it. One photo showed Hope at 5 years old, with her messy pigtails and that bright smile that lit up the entire house whenever she saw me come home from work. Back then, I worked double shifts at the textile factory to support my 2 children, as Michael had an accident at the construction site that left him unable to work for nearly 2 years. I would leave the house at 5 in the morning and return after 8 at night, completely exhausted, yet always with enough energy to check my kids' homework, prepare them a hot meal, and listen to everything they had done that day. Hope would always wait up for me in the living room, even if it was very late. "Mommy, you're home. I saved you a drawing I made at school," she'd say, running into my tired arms. Those hugs gave me the strength to get up the next day and do it all over again. I look at that photograph now and wonder exactly when my little girl became the distant woman who threw me out of the house as if I were a bothersome stranger. Was it when she married David and he began planting ideas about what a modern family should be? Or perhaps when they had children of their own and decided there was no longer room for Grandma in their ideal lives? Maybe it was a slow change, so gradual that I didn't notice until it was too late to do anything. I remember clearly the day Hope returned home after her honeymoon, glowing and full of plans for the future. Mommy, David, and I thought it would be best if she stayed here for a while until they saved enough for a house of their own. She told me with that familiar, warm smile I knew well. Of course I agreed. She was my daughter. She had just married, and I had plenty of space in the house since Charles had moved to Ohio with his family. "Of course, dear. This is your home, too, for as long as you need," I answered warmly. David seemed like a kind person at the time. Hardworking, respectful, and always addressing me as Grace with great courtesy. The first few months were truly pleasant. We dined together every evening. We discussed their jobs, their hopes of having a big, joyful family. I contributed to the household expenses, but they never saw it as a duty. It felt natural for all of us to help out according to our ability. Hope still greeted me with a hug when I returned from work. She still asked me about my day. She still called me, "my dear mommy," when she needed something. But gradually, very slowly, I hardly noticed how things started to shift in subtle ways. First, it was David who began to comment on how some family traditions had become outdated. "Grace, you don't need to wake up so early to make breakfast for everyone anymore." "We can manage on our own," he would often say with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then it was the little choices about the house. "Mommy, David and I think it's better to change the living room furniture. The ones we have now look very old." Hope would inform me. She no longer asked for my opinion. She simply shared what they had decided among themselves. The most painful change arrived when the grandchildren were born. Hope first had Lucy, a beautiful baby girl who became the light of my life from the very first moment. I immediately offered to care for her while Hope returned to work after her maternity leave. "Don't worry, Mommy. We're going to hire a professional to look after the baby, Hope told me with a coldness that sent a chill through my heart. A professional? What could be more caring than a grandmother's love for her children, especially after she had successfully raised two of her own? 2 years later, Peter was born, a lively, lovely boy who quickly captured my heart as well. By that time, the household rules had become very clear. I was allowed to see my grandchildren and share some time with them. However, all the important choices about their upbringing, education, and activities were made solely by Hope and David. I had become more of a guest in my own home, someone tolerated but whose opinions no longer mattered. Over the years, I tried to accept this new situation without complaint. I told myself it was natural for young people to need their space, and that I should step back and let them build their own family life. Still, deep inside, I felt a quiet sadness growing each day. It felt as if I were gradually fading away from my own life, becoming a ghost lurking in the corners of the house that had been my home for so many years. Family dinners grew silent and awkward. Hope and David talked among themselves about their plans, about people I didn't know, about things that didn't include me. The children ate quickly and hurried off to play, already used to Grandma being just part of the background, like another piece of furniture that had always been there. I tried to start conversations, asking about their days or sharing an interesting story, but their replies grew shorter and less interested. Weekends were especially hard. Hope and David took the children to visit his parents for family gatherings where I clearly was not welcomed. "Mommy, we're going to eat at David's parents' house. It's a private thing." Only Hope, the close family member, would tell me in the mirror as she fixed her hair. At 6:30 p.m., I would stay home alone, watching TV or reading an old magazine, trying not to feel so lonely amid what was supposed to be my own family. One Sunday afternoon, while they were out on a family outing, I decided to clean the house thoroughly to have something to do. In the closet of what used to be my room, but was now the kids' room, I found a box filled with letters and cards I had kept for years. They were all the notes Hope had written to me when she was a child. Messages like, "Best mom in the world," "Thank you for taking care of me when I was sick," and "I love you so much, Mommy." There were dozens of these small tokens of love, each written in her childish handwriting and decorated with drawings of hearts and flowers. I sat on the closet floor and cried for the first time in many years. Where had that little girl who loved me so much gone? When had I stopped being important to her? I read every letter. I remembered every time she gave me something meaningful. Mother's Day, when she was 8 and made me a breakfast, awkward but full of love. My birthday when she was 12 and sang me a song she had learned just for me. Her high school graduation when she thanked me for all the sacrifices I'd made to help her get a good education. That same night, after they returned from their family outing, I tried to talk with Hope. "Honey, could we talk for a moment? I feel like it's been a long time since we really spoke," I said gently. She looked at me with that familiar, annoyed expression. "Mommy, I'm very tired. The kids were very naughty today, and I need to get their clothes ready for tomorrow. Can it be another day?" Of course, that day never arrived. There was always something more important to do. There was always a reason to delay any real conversation between us. David had become increasingly aloof and distant toward me. He no longer made any effort to appear polite or respectful. "Grace, could you please avoid using the washing machine in the morning? The noise wakes up the children," he would say without even glancing at me. "Oh, Grace, we need you not to cook in the afternoons because Hope wants the children to get used to her cooking only." Every request felt like a disguised command. Every suggestion seemed designed to make me feel like an outsider in my own home. The breaking point came 3 months ago during a family dinner. That was when I finally saw my true position within this new arrangement. Peter had brought home a drawing from school, made with all the innocence of his 5 years. He proudly showed it to me. "Look, Grandma, I drew my family." The picture depicted his father, mother, sister, and himself, all holding hands in front of a nice house. I was nowhere to be seen. "And where is Grandma, my love?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice steady. My child replied casually that it was because his teacher had asked him to draw the family living in our house. Hope and David looked at each other in a way I immediately noticed. It was a look of shared understanding, as if they had been waiting for this moment to reveal a truth I had refused to acknowledge for years. I was no longer considered part of their immediate family. Yes, I was the grandmother, but only because I lived with them for convenience, not out of love or a genuine desire to have me close. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, sipping chamomile tea and reflecting on everything I'd lost without realizing it. The change hadn't come suddenly or dramatically. Instead, it had been a slow, steady fading of my place in my own daughter's heart. Each day that passed, I became a little less important, a little less needed, a little less loved, and the most painful part of it all was that I had let it happen, believing it was what a good mother should do. Step aside so her children could live their own lives. But now, sitting in my new apartment and looking at old photographs, I realized something very important. I did not step aside out of love. I stepped aside out of fear. Fear of being seen as a meddlesome mother-in-law. Fear of being accused of not knowing when to back off. Fear of losing my daughter entirely if I did not accept the conditions she and David had set to keep me in their lives. For all these years, I convinced myself that it was better to have some hope than none at all. Better to be tolerated than completely rejected. Better to be ignored than cast out. But in the end, I was rejected anyway. After years of shrinking myself, trying to take up less space, asking for less attention, and needing less love, I still found myself seen as a burden that needed to be removed. Last night, while I washed the few dishes I used for dinner, I thought back to all the times I washed mountains of dishes after family gatherings at my home, parties where I cooked for days and cleaned until late at night after everyone had gone to sleep happy and satisfied. I remembered the nights I stayed awake caring for my grandchildren when they were sick. All the times I prepared their favorite foods when others were too busy. The many moments when I was the one drying their tears, helping them through nightmares, or comforting them after injuries from playing. Where did all those memories disappear to when Hope decided I no longer belonged in her life? How could she so easily forget the years I was her shelter, her comfort, her unwavering support? At what moment did my love become a burden and my presence an obstacle to her happiness? This morning, as I sat quietly drinking my coffee in my small kitchen, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, so I chose not to answer. Then it rang again and again. Finally, I decided to pick up, and it was Lucy, my 7-year-old granddaughter. "Grandma, is that you?" she asked, her small voice always melting my heart. For a moment, my initial feeling was to soften and respond with all the love I had always given her. But then I remembered that Hope had shown me love isn't always returned, that affection isn't always appreciated, and that grandmothers can be easily replaced when mothers-in-law who contribute money arrive. "Hello, Lucy," I replied calmly, surprising even myself. "How did you get my number?" I asked my Uncle Charles for it when he visited us. "Grandma, why did you leave without saying goodbye?" "Mom says you moved in with other relatives, but I know you're upset with us," she said honestly, in a way only a child can. For a moment I considered telling her the full truth, that her mother had asked me to leave so her grandmother, who paid rent, could take my place. But Lucy is only 7 and she shouldn't have to carry the weight of adult decisions. "I'm not upset with you or Peter, my dear," I said gently. "I just thought it was time for Grandma to have her own little house." I added, "But I miss you so much, Grandma. Can we visit you? Can we see your new home?" Her question shattered my heart, yet at the same time it sparked a resolve I hadn't felt in years. These children are not responsible for their parents' choices, but I will not allow them to be exploited to fill the emotional gaps that Hope and David have created through their misguided priorities. "Lucy, when you are a bit older and can decide for yourself whom you want to visit, I will be here waiting," I told her firmly yet kindly. "But for now, you need to talk with your mom and dad about these matters." I heard her sad sigh before she hung up, and I stood holding the phone for several minutes, feeling a deep pain, but also a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I am not being manipulated by others' emotional needs. I am no longer used as the convenient grandmother who shows up when needed and disappears when she's in the way. I am no longer kept in constant doubt about my place in the family, always wondering if today I will be loved or just tolerated, if I will be included or ignored. This afternoon, I plan to enroll in the painting classes I saw advertised at the community center. Tomorrow, I will visit the local market to discover which stalls offer the freshest vegetables and best quality. This weekend, I intend to explore the city parks and choose the ideal spot to sit and read during the afternoons. I am working to create a new life that belongs entirely to me, where I no longer feel as if my presence is a favor to anyone. Hope wanted me to leave her perfect life behind. She never thought that disappearing might be exactly what I needed to rediscover myself. This morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't experienced in many years. It was not a sudden revelation or an instant moment of insight. Instead, it felt like a dense fog that had been obscuring my thoughts for a long time, finally lifted. allowing me to see clearly what steps I needed to take. As I made my morning coffee in my small kitchen, I recalled the words Michael had spoken to me before he passed away. Grace, if you ever need complete protection, use everything I've left you. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, my love. Sometimes people only realize what they've taken for granted when it's gone. That moment, I understood that Michael hadn't just left me money in the bank. He had given me the means to restore my dignity if my own family ever tried to undermine it. My husband knew David's character very well from the time he started dating Hope. That boy has ambitious eyes. He had told me once after a family dinner, "Be careful, Grace. People like that are always figuring out what they can gain from every situation." At the time, I defended David, thinking Michael was being overly harsh on our daughter's boyfriend. Now I see that my husband had seen clearly what I had refused to see all these years. After a quiet breakfast, I dressed in my best clothes and headed downtown with a clear purpose. My first stop was at Mr. Raymond Morris's office, the lawyer the bank manager had recommended when I sold the house. He's a man in his 50s, very professional, yet understanding of complex family issues. "Grace, it's wonderful to see you again." "How can I assist you today?" he asked with that warm smile that had given me comfort when I sold the house. "Mr. Morris, I need your help with some legal matters. I want to ensure certain decisions I made are entirely final." I explained as I took out a folder containing documents I had organized throughout the week. For the next 2 hours, we carefully examined every paper, contract, and legal document connected to the house sale and the transfer of my assets. The lawyer explained each detail patiently, ensuring I fully understood the meaning of every decision I had made. "Grace, I want you to know that everything you did was entirely legal and proper. The house was registered only in your name. The proceeds from the sale are completely yours, and no one has the legal right to challenge these decisions," he affirmed sincerely. "However, I would like to ask if you are fully certain you don't want to leave any options open for possible reconciliation with your family." His question made me pause briefly, but my response came out with surprising firmness. "Mr. Morris, after years of being considered a burden in my own home, I'm entirely sure I no longer want to emotionally depend on people who see me that way." After leaving the lawyer's office, I strolled through the city streets feeling a tremendous weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in many years, I felt I had full control over my life. I no longer needed permission to use my own kitchen. I could walk around quietly without worrying about disturbing anyone. I no longer had to hide my feelings to keep the peace in a home where my presence was barely accepted. It was both strange and wonderful to experience this freedom, to be myself completely, without considering the opinions or comfort of people who had long stopped valuing me. My next destination was the bank, where I had an appointment with the manager to discuss my investments and plan my financial future. "Grace, your finances are in excellent shape," she said as she looked at the numbers on her computer. "The money from the sale of the house, along with the savings your husband built up over the years, give you a very strong financial foundation for the years ahead." It was surprising to realize that Michael, who had worked in construction for many years, had managed to save a significant amount of money without me noticing. "Your husband was a man who always planned ahead," the manager said. "He left very clear instructions on how to manage these funds if you ever needed full independence." When I left the bank, I felt a sense of security I hadn't experienced since Michael passed away. I was no longer reliant on my daughter and her husband to provide me with a roof over my head. I no longer had to endure humiliations just to keep a place in a family that had made me feel like a second-class citizen. I no longer needed to force a smile and nod when they treated me as if I were a frail old woman with no valid opinions. For the first time in years, I was truly in control of my own future. That afternoon, as I was setting up new routines in my apartment, the phone rang. It was Hope, and for the first time in weeks, I decided to answer. "Mom," you finally answered. "I've been trying to reach you for days," she said in a voice that tried to sound worried, but which I knew very well. It was the same tone she used when she wanted something from me but tried to make me feel guilty for not giving it immediately. "Hello, Hope. What do you need?" I replied softly, with a calm that clearly took her by surprise. "Mom, what do you mean? What do I need?" "I'm your daughter. Can't I just call to see how you are?" she responded, feigning indignation she had practiced over the years. "Of course you can call, honey. I just wanted to know if there was something specific you needed because your tone sounds very urgent," I explained calmly. After a pause on the line, she finally said what she truly wanted to say. "Mom, David and I have been thinking, and we believe we might have been a little hasty when we asked you to leave the house. There it was, the emotional manipulation hidden behind supposed regret. Oh, really? What made you think that? I asked sincerely. Well, Doris turned out to be very different from what we had expected. She's very demanding, always finding something to complain about, and the children haven't adapted well to her presence. Additionally, David lost his job last week, and finances are very tight. She explained in a tone that tried to sound vulnerable, but to me it seemed deliberately calculated. It's unfortunate things didn't work out as you hoped, I responded calmly, showing no particular emotion. Mom, don't you understand what I'm telling you? We need you to come back. The kids ask about you every day. The house isn't the same without you, and we realize we made a serious mistake. She continued with what was clearly a carefully prepared speech. For a moment, my mother's heart wanted to believe they had finally realized the value of what they had lost. I hoped they truly missed me for who I was, not just for what I could do for them. But then I recalled the exact words Hope had spoken when she kicked me out. You just spend money and contribute nothing. I remembered the coldness in her eyes when she told me there was no going back. I thought of the years I had been treated like a stranger in my own home. Hope, I am very glad to know that you finally appreciate what you had, I said with a sweetness I did not feel. But I have already made very important decisions about my future, and I'm content with my new life. How can you be happy living alone in a small apartment when you could be here with your family? She asked, her voice showing clear confusion about how someone could prefer being alone to the company of a family that had treated her so badly. Hope, my apartment may be small, but it is completely mine. Here, no one tells me when I can use the kitchen, watch TV, or if my being around is convenient or not. This is a place where I am a full person, not just the grandmother who appears when she can help and disappears when she's in the way. I explained this clearly, which seemed to annoy her. Mom, don't be so dramatic. We never treated you the way you say we did. She answered with that familiar tone of indignation she uses when faced with something she doesn't want to admit. Hope, do you remember exactly what you said to me when you kicked me out of the house? I asked her directly. There was a long silence before she responded. We were going through a very stressful time. David had been under a lot of pressure at work. Doris was insisting we take her in. The costs were very high. It was nothing personal against you. It was not personal when I was told I only spent money and gave nothing in return. It was not personal when I was asked to leave so my room could be given to someone who paid rent. It was not personal when lies were told to the neighbors about where I was, just to hide that you had thrown out your own mother, I asked firmly, in a way I had never spoken to her before. Mom, I've already apologized. What more do you want me to do? Are you going to punish us forever for a mistake we admitted to? She answered with that victim's tone she had learned to use so well over the years. I hope I'm not causing anyone pain. I am simply living my life based on the lessons you gave me. You taught me I was a burden, so I decided never to be a burden to anyone again. You told me my efforts were not appreciated, so I chose to focus only on my own happiness. You made my place in the family seem conditional, so I have tried to live accordingly. So I decided to build my own family of people who value me without conditions. The silence that followed was so extended I thought she had hung up. At last, I heard her voice, but she no longer tried to sound sweet or remorseful. Mom, if that's your decision, we hope you find happiness in your new life, she said, but don't expect us to keep begging forever. Her words were cold, reminding me exactly why I had made the choices I did. I hoped I'd never asked her to beg me. I also don't ask you to understand my choices. I only ask that you respect them, just as I respected your decision to kick me out of my own home. I responded with the same cold tone. I hope you find a way to resolve your financial and family issues without relying on people you see as a burden. After ending the call, I sat in my small living room, reflecting on the entire conversation. I realized that Hope had confirmed exactly what I had suspected. They didn't need me. They needed what I could provide. They did not care about my company. They only valued my financial support. They did not appreciate my love. They cared about what I could do for them. It was a painful but necessary realization that I had made the right choices. That evening, as I prepared a simple yet tasty dinner just for myself, I thought about all the changes that had taken place in my life over the past few weeks. For the first time in years, I was not cooking for people who ate without appreciation. I was not cleaning up after others who left messes without regard. I was no longer living by schedules and rules set by those who saw me as an inconvenient presence. The next morning, I woke up early and went to the community center to finally sign up for the painting classes I had been delaying. The receptionist, a very kind lady named Rose, provided all the information I needed. Grace, you'll see that these classes are wonderful. I have many women your age who have discovered talents in art that they never knew they possessed. She told me with genuine enthusiasm. Plus, the group here feels like a small family. Everyone looks out for each other and offers support. The word family no longer brought the painful longing I had felt for so many years. Now I see that real family isn't about bloodlines or last names, but about mutual respect, true caring, and considering others' feelings. If these women at the community center can give me more understanding and support than my own daughter, then they are my chosen family. In the following week, I began to create entirely new routines for myself. I woke up when I pleased, ate whatever I wanted for breakfast, and took walks through the city parks without having to explain where I was going or when I'd return. In the afternoons, I enjoyed reading books I had wanted to explore for many years, but never found the time for, as there was always someone needing my attention. The phone would occasionally ring. Sometimes, it was Hope trying different tactics to persuade me to come back. First, she used guilt, saying, "Mom, the kids cry for you every night." Then she tried pity, claiming, "Mom, David has been very depressed since losing his job." Next, she resorted to emotional blackmail, saying, "Mom, if you don't return, the children will grow up thinking their grandmother doesn't love them." Each call made it clear that I had made the right choice. Hope continued to see our relationship as a kind of deal, where she set the rules and I had to accept them to remain part of her life. She hadn't realized that true love is based on mutual respect, not just mutual need. 3 weeks after her first call, I received an unexpected visit. It was Charles, my eldest son, who had traveled from Ohio just to speak with me. When I opened the door and saw him standing there with his serious, worried expression, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe he had understood what truly happened. "Mom, we need to talk," he said as he stepped into my small apartment and looked around with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Of course, honey." "Do you want some coffee?" I asked, offering my usual warm hospitality. As I made the coffee for both of us, he sat in my tiny living room and kept silent, clearly gathering his thoughts. "Mom, Hope told me everything that happened," he finally said. "She explained to me that it was all a misunderstanding, that you had a disagreement and that you left the house feeling hurt." I immediately saw that Hope had shared her version of what happened, a version where she was the misunderstood victim and I was the emotional mother overreacting to what was actually a normal situation. I asked Charles directly, "Did she tell you exactly what she said to me when she kicked me out of the house?" He seemed uneasy, clearly caught off guard by my straightforward question. She mentioned there were harsh words on both sides, that tempers had flared, and perhaps things had gone too far. He responded with the diplomacy he always used to avoid family conflicts. I then recounted everything precisely as it happened, including how Doris arrived to take over my room because she was paying rent. I explained to him how I had been treated like a maid in my own home over the years. I described the slow cooling of their attitude until my presence was barely accepted anymore. Charles listened quietly, and I could tell from his expression that he was finally grasping the true extent of what had happened. "Mom, I didn't realize things had gone that far," he said softly at last. "Hope had always assured me that you were very comfortable living with them, and that it was a situation that worked well for everyone. Charles, your sister only told you what she wanted you to believe so she wouldn't have to admit how she had been mistreating me for years." I responded with deep sadness, yet complete clarity. "But why did you sell the house, Mom?" "That seems like a very extreme response to me," he asked honestly. "Charles, after being expelled from my own home as if I were a stranger, despite years of being considered a burden, what certainty did I have that it wouldn't happen again? If I chose to return, how could I be sure I wouldn't be pushed out another time when it suited them?" My response left him speechless, as he finally grasped the perfect logic behind my decisions. I had not sold the house out of revenge or bitterness. I sold it to secure my full independence and to never again rely on the kindness of people whose goodwill had obvious limits. Charles sat quietly for several minutes after hearing the full truth about what really happened between Hope and myself. I could see in his face how he absorbed each detail, how the pieces of the puzzle finally aligned to create a very different picture from the one his sister had told him. "Mom, I truly had no idea about any of this," he finally admitted, his voice trembling with guilt. "If I had known how they were treating you, I would have stepped in right away." "Charles, dear, you have your own family to care for in Ohio. It wasn't your duty to oversee how your sister treated me in my own home," I replied with all the understanding I could muster. Besides, Hope became very good at putting on a perfect face in front of visitors and showing a completely different one when we were alone. Charles nodded sadly, recognizing the truth in what I said. Throughout all these years, whenever he came to see Hope, everything always seemed peaceful and joyful. The tension, the insults, the quiet disregard, everything was carefully hidden during family visits. But, Mom, don't you think selling the house was a bit too much? Maybe you could have talked it over, found some other solution. Charles insisted, clearly struggling with the idea that things had reached a point of no return. For years, Charles, I tried to talk to your sister. I wanted to share my feelings, needs, and desire to remain an important part of the family. Each time I was ignored, minimized, or outright dismissed. I explained myself with patience, but she made it very clear that I was a burden, that my presence was an inconvenience they had to put up with out of family duty. When someone tells you that so plainly, the only respectful response is to believe them and act accordingly. I continued pouring coffee for both of us. Selling the house wasn't about revenge, it was about liberation. It was the only way to ensure I would no longer rely on the kindness of people whose goodwill clearly had limits. Charles leaned back in his chair, visibly overwhelmed by everything he was hearing. Mom, Hope feels desperate. She called me crying, saying you don't answer her calls and that you want nothing to do with the family. She mentioned the grandchildren ask about their grandmother every day. Charles, I have not closed the door to a relationship with my grandchildren, but I won't let them be used as emotional tools to manipulate me into returning to a situation where I was not respected. I explained firmly. When Lucy and Peter are old enough to understand adult decisions and form their own opinions about family matters, I will be there for them. But I won't participate in a game where I am the convenient grandmother when help is needed, and the bothersome one when nothing is required. I added with firm resolve, which seemed to surprise my son. At that moment the phone rang. Charles and I looked at each other, and we both knew who it was before I even answered. Mom, is Charles with you? Hope asked without saying hello. Yes, he's here, I replied simply. Can you put him on? I need to speak with him urgently, she requested, her voice that familiar tone I recognized when she wanted something specific. I handed the phone to Charles, who answered cautiously. Hello, Hope. From my seat, I could clearly hear my daughter's distressed voice on the other end. Charles, you have to help me persuade Mom to come back. Things here are terrible. David is still unemployed. Doris is a constant nightmare, complaining about everything. The children are confused and upset, and I can't manage all of this by myself. Charles looked at me as he listened to his sister, and I saw in his eyes that he finally totally understood the situation. Hope, did you tell Mom she was a burden and that she had to leave so Doris could have her room? He asked her directly. There was a long pause before Hope responded. Charles, the atmosphere was very tense. We were under significant financial stress, and Doris was pressuring us. It wasn't as straightforward as it might seem. Hope, yes or no? Did you tell Mom she was a burden? Charles held firmly to a stance I hadn't heard from him since his teenage years. Well, yes, but I was feeling overwhelmed. I didn't mean to say it. It happened during a moment of intense pressure. Hope hesitated before speaking, realizing her usual excuses wouldn't work with her brother as they had before. Hope then told me the real story of what had occurred, not just that day, but over many years. Do you know she told me you treated her like a maid in her own home? Charles continued, voice growing stronger. Do you realize she said for years you made decisions about her house without asking her, ignored her during family dinners, and excluded her from gatherings? Charles, those are some exaggerations. Mom has always been quite dramatic. You know she tends to interpret things very strongly, Hope replied, using her usual tactic of dismissing others' feelings by calling them dramatic or exaggerated. But this time, it didn't work. Hope, I've known my mother for 40 years. In all that time, I've never seen her act dramatically or exaggerate about anything. If she says you treated her unfairly, it's because you truly did. Charles told her this with complete certainty. And honestly, after hearing the whole story, I believe my mom made the right choices to protect her dignity. The silence that followed was so lengthy we thought Hope had already hung up. Finally, we heard her voice again, but it no longer sounded desperate or manipulative. It was broken, defeated. Charles, what am I supposed to do now? David can't find a job. Doris is impossible to live with. I don't have enough money to rent another place. And the children really miss their grandmother. I hope those are issues that you and David caused when you decided to kick Mom out to please Doris. These are problems you both will need to solve without relying on Mom as a convenient solution." Charles responded sharply in a way that pleasantly surprised me. Mom is not to blame for the chaos you both created in your lives. But Charles, she is our mother. Families should support each other during tough times. Hope argued, appealing to the family values she had previously dismissed when she ousted me from the house. "You're right, Hope. Family is meant to support one another. But you decided Mom wasn't part of the family when you expelled her. Now, you can't claim the benefits of being family after rejecting the responsibilities that come with it," Charles explained with perfect clarity. After he finished the call, we sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he looked at me with a mixture of deep sadness and pride. "Mom, I am truly sorry I wasn't there to protect you from all of this. I regret believing Hope's version without questioning it. Most of all, I'm sorry you had to face all of this alone. Charles, dear, there's no need to apologize. You have always been a good son. You stay in touch and you come to visit when you can. You have always shown me respect and love," I said, taking his hands in mine. "What happened with Hope doesn't reflect how I raised either of you. Sometimes people change. Sometimes outside influences lead them down unexpected paths. Mom, I want you to know Patricia and I would be happy to have you in Ohio if you ever decide to move closer. We have a guest cottage in the backyard that we could prepare especially for you," he offered sincerely. His offer touched me deeply, but it also made me smile. "Charles, I truly appreciate your offer, and it brings me great comfort to know I have that option if I ever need it. For the first time in many years, I am creating a life that is entirely my own. I am discovering who I am when I no longer need to play the role of the caring mother, the helpful grandmother, or the accommodating mother-in-law," I explained, gazing out the window of my small apartment. "I am learning to paint watercolors. I've made new friends at the community center. I walk in the parks every afternoon. I read the books I've always wanted to read. For the first time in decades, my time belongs completely to me. My choices are entirely my own. My peace feels entirely mine," I continued with a heartfelt smile. Charles nodded in understanding. "Mom, I see you more peaceful and happier than I've seen in years. It's like you've reclaimed a part of yourself that you had lost." "Exactly, honey. I had lost my sense of who I was, trying to be what others expected of me. Now I am beginning to rediscover Grace, who she is when she doesn't have to please anyone." That afternoon, after Charles left to go back to Ohio, I got another phone call. This time it was David, which surprised me because in all the years he had lived here, he'd never reached out to me directly before. "Grace, I need to speak with you," he said in a voice that sounded like he was trying to be humble, though I could tell it was difficult for him. "Go ahead, David," I answered politely but without warmth. "Grace, I know things got out of hand. I know we said things that hurt you and we want to make things right. Hope has been in a very bad state since you left, and I realize we made some serious mistakes," he told me, sounding like he had prepared his words. "David, I'm glad to hear you finally recognized you made mistakes." "That is the first step toward personal growth," I replied carefully, without making any commitments. "Grace, could we perhaps talk in person? Maybe if we all sat down together, we could find a solution that works for everyone," he suggested, trying to sound reasonable. "David, a solution that truly worked for everyone would have been to treat me with respect and consideration from the very start. It would have meant valuing my contribution to the family rather than seeing me as a burden. A solution that worked for everyone would have been to include me in decisions affecting my own home instead of treating me like an unwanted guest." I explained calmly, clearly, even though he clearly did not expect that. "But Grace, we did value you. Maybe we didn't show it well enough. Perhaps we weren't as clear as we could have been. But you were always important to us." He tried to argue logically, but his reasoning fell apart when faced with the facts. "David, actions speak louder than words. Over the years, your actions clearly showed me my place in your family. Grace Doris is no longer here. She didn't even last 2 months. She complained all the time, criticized everything we did, and demanded constant attention. The children disliked her, and Hope was nearly on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I realized what we had lost when we asked you to leave," he admitted honestly, which surprised me. "How interesting, David. So Doris was exactly the kind of person you thought I was?" I asked softly but with sharp irony. "No, Grace, that's not what I mean. You were never like that. You were always—" He hesitated, clearly realizing he had fallen into a logical trap. David, let me explain something very important to you. I was never a burden in that house. I contributed financially more than you knew and did more domestic work than you recognized, and I gave more love and care than you appreciated. The difference between Doris and me isn't that she's more difficult. It's that you mistreated the wrong person, and I explained it so clearly that he was left speechless. Grace, what would it take for you to consider coming back? What conditions would you want us to meet? He asked, clearly trying to hide his desperation. His question made me laugh, not out of meanness, but with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. David, that question shows you still don't understand what really happened here. This isn't about conditions or negotiations. It's about fundamental respect and true love, things that cannot be demanded or bought, I explained patiently. You showed me for years that you saw me as a convenience, not as a person of worth in her own right. Now that you've lost that convenience, you want to negotiate to get it back. But people can change, Grace. We can learn from our mistakes and improve ourselves. He kept hoping I would agree, but that wasn't going to change my decision. David, people can change, but only when they truly recognize the harm they've caused and are willing to do the inner work necessary to become different. So far, all I've heard from you are excuses and justifications. What do you mean by that? He asked, genuinely confused. David, I've never heard Hope or you say, Grace, we treated you badly. We hurt you deeply. We understand exactly why you felt humiliated and rejected. We take full responsibility for what we did. Instead, I've heard, we were under stress. The circumstances were tough. You're overreacting. It was a misunderstanding. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Finally, David spoke softly. Grace, we treated you badly. We hurt you deeply. We understand why you felt humiliated and rejected, and we accept full responsibility for our actions. His words sounded sincere, but they arrived too late. David, I appreciate that you can finally say those words. It is an important step in your personal growth. However, recognizing the harm you caused does not automatically undo the consequences. I explained this gently but firmly. I made choices to protect my dignity and emotional health. Those choices are not going to change just because you are sorry now. So, you may never forgive us. Will we never get another chance to be a family? He asked with a sadness that touched me, but would not alter my course. David, I have already forgiven you. Forgiveness was something I did for my own peace, not as a gift to you, but forgiving does not mean forgetting, and it certainly does not mean going back to a situation that caused me pain. You can have a perfectly happy family without me. In fact, it's clear that was your goal when you asked me to leave. Now you have the chance to create exactly the family you want, without the burden that my presence used to bring. I responded with a calmness that took me by surprise. After hanging up with David that night, I sat on my small balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, gazing at the stars over my new city. For the first time in many years, I felt no weight of family expectations. I wasn't pressured to be what others demanded of me. I no longer felt the constant worry of walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting anyone. Tomorrow, I will begin my second week of painting classes. The day after, I have plans to meet Rose, my new friend from the community center, to visit the craft market together. Over the weekend, I will go to explore a new park on the other side of the city. My life may be simple, but it is entirely my own, and that makes all the difference. Hope and David finally understood a lesson I had been trying to teach them for years without realizing it, that truly valued people cannot be taken for granted. It's clear that love and respect are not unlimited resources, available forever, regardless of how we treat others. Some choices made long ago can change everything forever. They wanted a family without the need to respect all its members. Now, they have that family. 6 months after our last talk, I am sitting on my small apartment terrace, sipping my morning coffee, and watching the sun illuminate the park where I walk every afternoon. The view from here is truly lovely, and I see others like me. People who have learned that family isn't always what we imagine, but that life can be just as rich and meaningful without those unrealistic expectations. This morning I found a letter under my door. It was written in shaky handwriting, stained with dried tears, filled with desperate apologies and pleas for me to reconsider my decision. She informed me that David had finally found a job, but his salary was much lower than before. They had to move into a smaller apartment because they could no longer afford the rent on a large house. She also mentioned that Doris had returned to her sister's house after causing problems in every family that had taken her in. I read the entire letter carefully, folded it neatly, and placed it in a special box where I keep things that no longer hold any real importance in my new life. I don't feel satisfaction from their troubles, but I also do not feel the need to rescue them from the results of their choices. My phone rings occasionally during the week. Sometimes it is Hope, sometimes it is David, and once it was even Doris asking if I would be willing to mediate between her and David so they might reconcile. I listen to the phone ringing until it stops completely, then I calmly go back to my daily routines. I have learned that not every call needs to be answered, especially when it's from someone who only reaches out when they need something. In my painting class, I have found a talent I never realized I had. My watercolor landscapes have improved so much that Mrs. Linda, my teacher, suggested I think about showcasing my work at the exhibition the community center hosts each year. Grace, you have a natural gift for capturing peace and calm in your paintings. Last week, she told me while viewing my latest piece that it's clear I paint from a place of inner tranquility. Rose, a friend from the community center, invited me to join her on a visit to her son in Florida next month. Grace, my daughter-in-law, often asks about you. She appreciates how you speak about your independence with such calm and confidence. She believes she could be a positive influence for her mother, who is facing a similar situation with her other children. She shared this with me while we were watering the plants together in the community garden we started at the center. It's amusing how life brings new families into your life when you least expect it. The women I've met through my activities understand well what it feels like to be undervalued by your own children. They know what it's like to have to choose between maintaining dignity and keeping peace in the family. We support one another without judgment, without rivalry, and with no expectations beyond honest companionship and mutual respect. Yesterday, while sorting through my few cherished belongings, I came across an old photograph of Hope at age 15. We were in the kitchen. She was helping me prepare tamales for Christmas, both of us smiling, our hands full of dough. I stared at it for a long moment, recalling the young girl who once told me that when she grew up, she wanted to be just like me. I wonder when that admiration turned into resentment. When did my love become a burden for her? I placed the photograph into my personal album, not into the box of trivial things, because even though Hope led us down separate paths forever, that girl in the picture truly loved me. I choose to remember that love and not let the later absence of love overshadow it. This afternoon, while walking through my favorite park, I unexpectedly met Anthony, my former neighbor. Grace, how lovely to see you here. You look very well, very peaceful, he said, greeting me with that warm smile I always appreciated. I briefly told him about my new life, my painting classes, and the friendships I've made. I'm so pleased to hear you're doing so well, Grace, he replied. To be honest, after all the drama surrounding the sale of your house, I expected you'd be very upset. But you seem happier than ever. Anoni's words, sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that give us the most peace, I said as we sat on a bench beneath a large, shady tree. How are things back in the old neighborhood? I asked more out of politeness than real curiosity. Oh, Grace, what can I tell you? The family that bought your house is very kind, but I've heard through the grapevine that Hope and David had to move to a much smaller place. I see the children looking sad on the street. His words caused a sharp pain in me, not for Hope or David, but for Lucy and Peter. They are the innocent victims of their parents' selfish decisions. Still, I understand that my duty is not to protect my grandchildren from the outcomes of their parents' choices. My duty was to protect my own dignity and well-being, and I stayed true to that. The children will adjust, Anthony. They are resilient and have parents who, despite making serious mistakes with me, love them deeply. They will learn valuable lessons about how to treat loved ones, I said with calm conviction. When they grow older and wish to find me, I will be here. But it will be their choice, not a duty forced by adults who failed to appreciate what they had. Tonight, before going to sleep, I looked out my window at the stars shining over my new city. Michael, if you are watching from heaven, I want you to know I made good use of all the gifts you left me. Not only the money you saved carefully, but also the lessons about personal dignity you shared during our years together. Thank you for preparing me for independence before you left. Thank you for showing me that true love also means protecting the person you care about so they can stand up for themselves. Hope thought she was punishing me by kicking me out of the house. What she did not realize was that she was giving me the freedom I had never dared to take before. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals can turn into the greatest blessings in disguise. Sometimes, when those we expect to love us reject us, it opens the way for others who truly know how to love. Tomorrow, I will begin a new painting of a sunrise over the park where I have found so much peace. It will be my way of celebrating this new life I have built from nothing. In this life, no one makes me feel as if my existence is a favor they are doing me. At 68, I have finally learned that sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is to distance yourself from those who do not appreciate your value. Sometimes the best fresh start is found in the quiet choice to remain silent forever. Elderly Stories is interested in discovering how many people have heard this story. Where are you reading from? Please leave a comment below.